Continuing on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab is proud to present Chris Garmire. Chris has been an archivist at the California State Archives for almost 14 years and has recently been promoted to manager of the Reference Services Unit. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Political Science from the University of the Pacific and a certificate in Archives and Records Management, a certificate in Genealogical Research from Boston University, as well as a Juris Doctorate from the McGeorge School of Law. His research interests vary from early legal history of California, specifically the history of attorney licensure in California and the history of copyright in sports broadcast. Today's presentation is titled Genealogical Records at the California State Archives, and he will be giving us a brief history of the California State Archives and how to access the most researched record groups, such as federal and state census, military, vocational, court, probate, birth, marriage, death, and immigration records. He will also cover what other depositories have California genealogical records of your interest. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Chris.
Thank you, Suzanne. I guess it's still good morning, everybody. I want to thank everybody for attending today's presentation and the opportunity to speak to everybody today about the genealogical records that are available at the California State Archives. I spoke with Suzanne earlier in the week about our initiative at the California State Archives to really make more available and more accessible are records of genealogical interest, specifically describing them more effectively and making them more available to those that are interested in those record series. They have always been available to the public and available for research, but once I was promoted, I really wanted to make this an area of emphasis for the California State Archives. Because I think they're an area, rich in historic value and of interest. And so I really think this is a first step in that initiative of, making those records, more widely known and accessible. So I really thank everybody for allowing me the opportunity to present, our records and giving me the opportunity to really speak about the fascinating, types of record series that may be of interest to you. So I'll just proceed and describe a little bit about the history of the California State Archives. We were the first state agency ever created by the newly formed state of California in 1850. We were created by Chapter 1, Stats 1850. And the interesting thing about the state of California is that after we were created, any type of legislation that the state legislature could have been considering when forming the new state, the first thing that they thought of was actually creating a state archives to create all the papers that were created by the new government. And what we do create at the California State Archives, what we collect, are records of the three branches of state government. So the executive department, so the state, the governor's office, and the state agencies. So anything from Department of Corrections, Department of State Hospitals, any type of state agency that is technically under the governor's office that we identify as historically relevant, we will eventually take into the state archives. Records of the California State Legislature, so records from individual legislators themselves or committee records. That is a very highly researched record group of the California State Archives because legislative intent is specifically highly researched at the California State Archives. So when there's a dispute about what actually the legislature had intended, a specific perhaps phrase, wording, a key area of the legislation, and that's litigated, researchers will come to the state archives and pull the original documents that the legislature actually used to create an actual bill. So we have those records at the state archives. All the original laws that are actually passed and are actually filed with us at the state archives, going back to the original 1850, are all with us at the state archives. Records of the court. So all the records of the Supreme Court, all those decisions, original minutes are filed with the state archives. And we only basically we either had the superior courts at the local level or the Supreme Court until they became overworked. And then starting in 1905, there was actually a constitutional amendment that actually created the appellate courts. And starting in 1905, we started in California with an appellate court system. So we actually do have records from the appellate court. Those case files are actually sampled through various methods, but we do actually take in appellate courts as records as well.
Chris, may I interrupt just for a second?
Sure.
I think some of the students are not being able to see the bottom of your slide. Can you make the toggle bar on the side go down a little bit further?
So right here, like this?
Yeah, or the one on the side, on the right-hand side. The scroll
Right
bar.
hand.
Yeah, they just want to make sure that they're not missing anything on your slides.
Sure. Let me. Actually have the video bar. Let's see here.
Yeah, maybe if you just make your screen a little bit bigger
Okay, sure.
by stretching it, that might change it.
Okay. Does that work?
Yeah, it looks, is that the right there at the bottom where it says the archives also contain records from both county and local? Is that the last words on your slide?
Yeah, the archives also contains, yes, that's the last.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'll just go ahead and turn off my microphone. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So we also have records of all sorts of different types of formats. So they can be textual, cartographic, maps of rolled maps, flat maps. So for example, we have records from the Public Utilities Commission, which at first was actually created to regulate the railroads. We have a substantial amount of maps that document railroads, early railroad history in California. So substantial amount of rolled maps. We have records in audiovisual format. So anything from early 2-inch quadruplex tape to DVDs, CDs, cassettes, reel-to-reel tape. Electronic records. So we had a substantial amount when Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger left office. We had a substantial amount of electronic records that were transferred to us. Substantial amount of photographic records. So the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge, we have a substantial amount of photographic records that document the creation of that entire project. And micrographic materials. So we have a substantial amount of microfilm as well. Aperture cards that document some very, very long maps that it's almost like a pre-scanning project that they actually took these 30, 40, 50 foot maps and put them in, really, really small kind of microfilm type cards. So we have Bertillon cards, for example. I'll talk about a little bit about those in our corrections segment. So we have, you name the format, we have it. It becomes a little bit challenging when we need to reformat sometimes materials, but we do have records in a variety of formats, and it really kind of tells the story of California and how the government actually documented their record keeping. We also have records from both county and local jurisdictions. We are not a repository generally of county records, which I can get into a little bit, because usually most records of genealogical value in California tend to be created at the county level. And we do have local jurisdictions like what we would consider city and county charter files or annexations. So those are basically how city and local governments are organized, or if they want to annex territory to enlarge their jurisdictions, we will get those filings. But in general, the county records that will document individuals, whether it be land recordations, vital records, those types of things, marriage, death, birth, are generally recorded at the county level in California. And those are some of the genealogical records that are most kind of at the top of the list when people are researching, and the questions that we would get on the reference desk. And those are mostly at the county level. Not to say that we don't at the state archives have those records, which is one of my points of emphasis into making the records that we do have more discoverable. Okay, so what do we have at the California State Archives that would be of genealogical interest? Let's go to vital records. We do have records of marriage, death, and birth. If you'll review your handout that was provided, that is the local government records handout that if you were at the state archives on the reference desk and you came in to look for a relative, let's say that was lived in Butte County, for example, the records that we would have in Butte County. Those records that are indicated at the local government handout were filmed by the Genealogical Society of Utah in the 1980s. And it was a collaboration between the State Archives and Genealogical Society of Utah. And what happened is that the Genealogical Society would go into several different counties after the State Archives had negotiated an agreement where either the recorder, the county clerk, it varies in different counties, who's in charge of either the probate files, the naturalization records, the vital records, and who is in charge of those records, and then would negotiate the ability for Genealogical Society of Utah to microfilm the records. They would go in, microfilm the records, and then the state archives got a courtesy copy of those records. So these are records that are actually held at the county because the county would be the one who would create them, but the state archives would got a courtesy copy. So over the years, we would have these backup copies, so to say, or use copies of county records. And they're extremely valuable because they're kind of a one-stop shop at the state archives where you can go to 28 different counties at one time and research, various marriage, death, birth records, naturalization records, those types of things that we'll kind of get into. But overall, the state archives does not collect in general those types of records. But they did this as sort of a preservation project, greater accessibility project. And so, through talks like these, through more initiatives for genealogy, we kind of want to take that next step and make them more available, given a lot of the different questions that we have, sometimes the difficulties in getting these types of records. So the state archives does get, requests for these types of records, marriage, death, and birth records. So we also have military records, state hospital records, immigration records. The military records are from the Adjutant General's department, and they vary anywhere from the Civil War era up until pre-World War II. State hospital records vary anywhere from around the start of statehood to almost current day. And that's a very rich source of genealogical information. We'll get into exactly, there's restriction issues there, given the sensitivity of those records. We have immigration records. Those are from the Genealogical Society of Utah, because immigration was either held either in the state of California, either at the local court level or by the federal government. But through our processes of getting that microfilm, we have a substantial amount of county records that vary from 19th century to, up into the 1980s. We also have property records from Spanish land grants that predate statehood, which are what we would call expedientes, which are basically legal descriptions of records, and diseños, which are maps, that to this day you can trace some property records all the way back to the Spanish land grants, and some of the land grants have still, never been transferred beyond the original grantee from Spain. And some of the land, you can trace property records all the way from the original Spanish land grant, but those are extremely popular. I think most of the expedientes and diseños are actually posted online on the Internet Archive. There's also probate records. So when a state, someone passes away and the estate has to go through probate, that's an extremely valuable resource for genealogical research. That's also through the Genealogical Society of Utah collection. Substantial amount of county records that we have that have probate information. Again, we don't necessarily, for all of these, like Genealogical Society of Utah materials, there could be indices on those materials for the probate. We have that index in their handout. So if you're looking for a specific individual, it's very handy to know which county they may have lived in. Some may have an index to the probate, some don't. The good thing about a lot of this material is that all the Genealogical Society of Utah material has also been digitized by Ancestry. We do have an Ancestry subscription at the California State Archives. So if you do know the individual's name, we can search it through Ancestry for you if you do actually know the individual's name. So that would kind of assist greatly in that regard. We have vocational records. So a substantial amount of professions have been regulated by various iterations of the Department of Consumer Affairs, for example. So you're talking like veterinarians, physicians, cosmetologists, barbers, wrestlers. So if you know somebody who you're researching had one of these professions, those are specific records also that can be of genealogical value. Those materials also, those series of records have been digitized. Sorry. Records continued. Prison records, these are also highly used and very popular. So we have records from San Quentin, Folsom, starting back from right around the 1880s, 1870s. What you would think of traditionally as a mug book, we have the mug books, the physical actual books that actually have the photographs. And those run up, the photographic series run up until about the 40s. We have a gap, and then it starts about through the 50s through right around the 1990s, early 90s, when we have the more modern case files. And when we get to prison records, I can kind of explain more in detail what records we can have, what we have. But court records, we have Supreme Court, appellate court records. We also have attorney applications. And one of my areas of interest is actually how attorneys became attorneys back when the state first began. And we actually do have old attorney applications that went through to the appellate court. So attorneys were not regulated as other professions were through like Department of Consumer Affairs. So that also has genealogical value as well. We have census records. We have one of the limited state censuses is 1852. That's an extremely popular census. We just recently digitized that. So I'm sure we'll be having plans on releasing that fairly soon. We have the 1880 federal census. We actually have the schedules that were released to us from the National Archives from the 60s. We have the 1860s federal census. We have actually the schedules that were deposited with the Secretary of State. We also have limited, an 1897 statute actually authorized limited city censuses up until 1938. So we actually have censuses that would actually, from several different California cities, that would have also similar type information. So we have gender, age, address. So those types of information is also recorded in these specific city censuses that we have. We also have records from the Secretary of State's office. So oaths of office from various officers, name changes. So beyond, I have to say, beyond the genealogical information, if you're looking, if you know somebody in California who is actually looking to, for example, if they need to get a passport, if they need any other information that would necessitate them getting a name change information, the Secretary of State has the name change at a certain period of time. The counties do. So I know in certain circumstances, the name change may not have been at the county level, but we had a copy at the Secretary of State's office. But we only had to have those for a specific period of time. Articles of incorporation, we also have from the Secretary of State that may be of some genealogical importance if somebody you're researching had a business. It also lists all of the incorporators and at what time period. So we have articles of incorporation of Walt Disney, Levi Strauss. So that could be of some genealogical importance. The photo to the right is the first page of the first Supreme Court minutes of 1850. So let's start with some, examples of specific series of records. Immigration records, for example, this is an example of a declaration of intention. That was the first step in the immigration process. So this is actually an example from the Genealogical Society of Utah collection. So what do we have from some of the counties? We have declarations of intention, petitions, and the actual certificates of naturalization, and also the indices. And this is also listed in that local records handout. These are also digitized by Ancestry. And like I said, if you find something on that local government records handout, you're interested, you have an individual that is that you may be researching, feel free to give us a call. I do have that contact information on the handout, and we can go ahead and take that request down and search through Ancestry for you to make that a little easier. Military records. So what do we have in the way of military records? Civil War muster rolls, including military ballots. So I know we just got done with the election, and one of the really fascinating things that I learned, we really have a military records expert on staff, and he really did a great exhibit on sort of the first mail ballots were actually Civil War ballots that they cast during the Civil War. And so we have some of those military Civil War ballots. So I thought that was really fascinating piece of history. And so we have some of those, what are called the Indian War Papers. So records regarding records that are created by the Adjutant General regarding the Indian Wars. That was the name that the record series was given. Indices. So records of that would sort of assist us in accessing those military records. Records of the National Guard. Most of these records are actual National Guard records. and they date basically almost to the pre-World War World War II era. So up until right around World War II, and military registers, which this is a naval register, also National Guard record. So we will get requests that a lot of them actually end up being to the Personnel Records Center that NARA has, but we will get a lot of Civil War requests for the muster rolls and the National Guard records. But if you are looking for California National Guard records, or somebody may have served, we do have those. We do have those records. There were a lot of California volunteers who went to serve in the Civil War, so we do have records of those individuals. Probably lesser known and lesser researched are probably the post Civil War and up until like the World War One era. State hospital records. These are also very highly researched, and there's a high interest in state hospital records. State hospitals were administered first by what was called the Department of Mental Hygiene. They have record series. Basically, we have indices. We have male and female indices. We have records that are like this, which are called abstracts of commitments, which are records that they would have basically an index. They may have what were called registers as well. And they would have records like this where maybe genealogists and most researchers are really interested in, which is basically maybe what we would think of as maybe an intake record. What is the issue? Why is the patient in the hospital? Why did they come in? Why did they come into the hospital? Where are they being treated for? So those are the very very highly sought after records. Stockton State Hospital was located in Stockton, California. It was very highly researched, but we have a very limited amount of records from there as far as the time period is concerned. But there are, as you may imagine, with state hospital records, there's a lot of privacy issues associated with those records. So those records are going to be restricted until 75 years has passed since the date of last activity. So we do have state hospital records that go back to the 19th century and then go back up to quite current times. So if you're looking for an individual who may have been in a state hospital, you have to also be mindful that you may be able to get access to it. You may not be able to get access to it. It just depends on if 75 years has passed since the date of last activity, if we do have the material. But the types of records that we do have tend to run from, like I said, the abstract of commitment. We do have death registers. So they will sort of assist researchers in place and time. Also, because there are individuals who we will get requests and they're kind of wondering, we have a relative and we know they're in this hospital, but we don't know why. And so a lot of times we don't even have the records for that time period. If it's past 75 years, then the record can be released. If it's not, you have to wait until that 75-year time period has passed. And vocational standards records. So these are records that, as I indicated before, various vocations are regulated by the state. And this kind of goes back to my earlier discussion of what the California State Archives collects and what they might not collect. We collect records of California state agencies, California state government, not necessarily records of individuals per se. If the state agency is in the business of regulating individuals and they collect records of individuals, then as a byproduct of that, we might have genealogical information. And so this is one of the instances where, as a result of the state regulating individuals because of their professions, as a byproduct, we're going to have genealogical information, as opposed to the state for vital records, for example. The state the vital records are actually captured at the local level, and the master records are kept at the Department of Health or Public Health, but we as the state archives do not receive copies of those. So that's a little differentiation there. So vocational standards records, so records of physicians, so we have deceased physicians records. Veterinarians, we have their original licensure information. Boxers, we have boxer licensures. Dentists, beauticians. So some of these records will have a photo, and it places really the individuals at a particular time and place. So if you're, and I can't emphasize this enough, we very rarely have photos in specific individuals. It's very rare unless we have specific manuscript collections that we will get. So not necessarily state records, but if we took in a donation of records, we may have specific photos of individuals, or, if it happens to be, photographs like the Oakland Bay Bridge, and they'll take photographs of workers working on the individuals, but those generally tend not to be identified. But this is one of the rare record series where you actually have photographic identification of individuals. So this is a very, a pretty, apologize for that. It's a very good representation of a genealogical resource. This is a directory of physicians that I've included to the left that's been digitized on Ancestry. So this is also a very good resource as well. Court records, another highly used resource. Not necessarily, the genealogical resources specifically, I included this specifically because Clara Foltz was the first female attorney licensed on the Pacific Coast and in California. So there could be genealogical resources or research potential if you're actually looking for specific individuals or litigants, or if you're actually looking for specific cases that may be of interest to you. We do have all Supreme Court cases. So there could be, this is another series where there are actually individuals, and there are genealogical cases in the past where you can actually find in court records or applications for pardon. They're sort of considered court cases. So this is just another series to think of where we might have genealogical import. Like I said, there's the attorney applications as well, civil and criminal cases. So there's just basically it's a little bit more research to do behind this because you'll have to know exactly which court case you're looking for. We have, depending on what time period you're looking at, up until about the 1930s, they're indexed through the WPA system. We would still need to know the case, but we'll just have to look up the WPA number to access that. But they are a very good source of genealogical information if you're looking for a specific individual, because if they do have a Supreme Court case, then that could be a wealth of information, because they could have not only the Supreme Court case, a decision, they could have briefs, they perhaps could have letters, by the individual who is litigating the case. So there's, a wealth of information that could possibly be in a Supreme Court case. You know, the odds aren't very high. Sometimes maybe that the person you're looking for, you know, litigated something in the Supreme Court, but if they did, then it could be a wealth of information. So it's just something to think about if you're are looking for somebody who, you know, maybe an attorney or maybe somebody who's litigated something at the court level. This also counts for the you know, the appellate court level, especially too if you're looking for lower court records that don't exist at the county. Always think of, did this possibly get litigated up the ladder to the appellate court or the Supreme Court? Because sometimes that lower court case could be included in the appellate court or Supreme Court. So that's something to think about if somebody you're researching, you know, happen to have some litigation at the lower court level and you can't find it. It could have been litigated up the chain to the appellate court and the Supreme Court level. So that's just something to think about. Property records. As I was indicating, property records, deeds are recorded at the county level in California. So if you're buying a house, if you're buying any other type of property, that's going to be recorded at the county level. We do have, as I indicated, those diseños and expedientes that are online at the Internet Archive. But we do have, as part of the GSU collection, those county records that do sort of speak to property. We have Liz Penda's records, which are just written notices of lawsuits regarding property. I've included an example here, as well as married women's property records, given that California is a community property state. And property records are, you know, just extremely valuable in determining, as well as, you know, we have probate records as well, which are kind of just sort of another, you know, another version of property records, really listing, you know, estate records. But they're extremely valuable in determining time and place, really, because you really, and connections between people. So we do have those records as well. This is also part of the Genealogical Society of Utah film collection. These are also been digitized by Ancestry. You'll also find these types of records in that local government records handout that was provided before the class. So these are the specific types of records that I'd like to see, you know, us describe more. I'm working actually on more of a descriptive record for our catalog in Minerva, which I'll be getting to shortly. And so get these records used a little bit more. I think they're very valuable. And this is actually from the County of Colusa record. And it really references also mortgage records that are in the at the recorder, county recorder in Colusa. I've researched at the county recorder in Colusa, so I know that you'd actually, if you found something of interest in this record, you could go to the county recorder in Colusa. It's a immaculate county recorder's office, so you'd be able to actually cross-reference that record at the county recorder in Colusa. So there's really a lot of good cross-references in this record right here. So I think I just, you know, as I talked about earlier, I think these are just really valuable records that, you know, provide a lot of good cross-references that would assist your research. Going back to prison records, this prison record right here is what we would call a photo card. The photo cards are a little bit later on in the series generally. This one I think is from 1918, but or 1919. But they're generally, they overlap with our mug books. But we have a good photo run from the late 19th century to about the mid 40s. There's a gap in the series, and then we have what are called corrections case files or C files that go into about 30 years after date of discharge, which right now is 1990. So let me just go over what we have in prison records. We have photos that go from San Quentin to Folsom to the current California correctional facilities that we have now, from around 1880 to around the 40s. There's a bit of a gap to around the mid 50s to about 1990. We have inmate registers that go, from around the 1870s to about around the 1940s. The registers are actually been digitized on Ancestry. We have case files that go from about the 1890s to about mid 1950s. There's a gap, and then that picks up in the late 50s that go to about 1990. We don't really have the 90 files yet, but we get records that are about 30 years after date of discharge. Commitment papers, those run probably around, late 1860s, 70s to about early 1900s. Those are basically the records where they are kind of intake files. Applications for pardon, for executive clemency records, those are also very good information because they're almost kind of a substitute for the case files. So and these are all the records, if you actually would put in a request for an inmate, we would look for all of these depending on the time period. And there's also the actual pardon itself. And I would say that the application for pardon and executive clemency, not too often will we find records because there's just not a substantial amount of applications or executive clemencies that really go through, but we always look. But when we do find them, there's a substantial amount of information in them, but there just doesn't seem to be as many files that we tend to find. Commitment papers the same way because we just don't have as many. There's the time period is just short, but we will always look for the application for pardon or the executive clemency. The application for pardon or clemency is just a time period difference on what the title is for that. The pardon is the actual pardon that is granted by the governor. You might notice that there's the side photo and the front on photo. Just the difference is the hat. During that time period, hats were standard fashion wear. So a lot of individuals, both men and women, wore hats. And that was sort of the standard dress of the day. So you will see during this time period that the mug shots, the individuals would be wearing hats and would not be wearing hats. Just so for law enforcement purposes, they would know, what the individual looked like with a hat and with not a hat. I mentioned Bertillon cards too. We do have a little series of Bertillon cards. Bertillon cards predated fingerprint cards, and they were based on body measurements as a way of identification. Okay. And I alluded to some research resources that we have at the State Archives. In our handout, you can click on, this is the link, and this is the link I provided is the one I provided in the handout. This is Minerva, which is our online catalog. And the archives is a little different because than maybe a library in the sense that our resources are organized by creator. And so even if you do a keyword, you may get to a collection based result. So, you may get a collection that's based a result and it's based on a hierarchical structure. As opposed to a library that may be based on subjects. Because an archival repository we organize things based on how the creator has organized those records. So you may you may search prison in a keyword, or you may mental health, and you might get mental hygiene, and then that underneath there you might get the specific different state hospitals, and so the records you're actually looking for may be underneath 2 or 3 levels, because we organize it sort of in that hierarchical structure. So it takes a little getting used to searching the catalog, because it's basically structured in a different way, because we're really we really structure the information on how the state agency is organized, or how the legislative committee is organized, and how they organize that information. There's also our family history resources that is on our website, and so that'll give you a little bit more information about what I talked about today, if you're a little more interested in maybe some shortcuts to some of the information that I talked about. There's also Online Archive of California. So if you're interested in maybe genealogical resources that are not with the state archives, so I think I gave an example of maybe some records that are at Stanford. The Online Archive of California is a repository of finding aids, and a finding aid is just basically a descriptive guide of maybe a specific collection at a specific repository, and it gives you some descriptive information and maybe a list of what the records are contained in that collection. And so a substantial amount of California repositories all submit their finding aids to this one basically online database, so that you're not just searching California State Archives, you can search Berkeley, Stanford, all these different repositories. And so if you're interested in the specific, if you're really interested in birth records, you could look at churches, you could look at Catholic institutions, or other different types of institutions that may keep specific birth records, other organizations that might keep birth records or marriage records, that may not be associated with a specific organization. So that's just another tool that is available to you, and so I just use that one at Stanford as as an example. But there are other resources out there that can be of use to you. And this is, by the way, this slide here is from our Fred Meyer collection. That's Mount Shasta. And so this is sort of another example of a different type of format that we have. And Fred Meyer, that's a sort of a personal collection that we have. So it's just another example of different types of collections that we may have. And this is the outside of our building. And so how to research at the state archives. Right now, COVID-19 has impacted our research services. We're currently closed to in-person research. We are still taking requests via the US mail. You can send us an email at archivesweb@sos.ca.gov, or the phone at 916-653-2246. We are located at 1020 O Street in Sacramento, California, 95814, and we are 1 block south of the state capitol in Sacramento. So, once we open up, I would invite everybody to come on in and come visit us and take a look around at our research room and do some in-person research. Definitely, we're also on the. You can kind of see it back here on the bottom. We're kind of on the light. We are on the light rail stop, so we actually have our own stop at the light rail station. And we've got one last slide here for questions, but I just wanted to let everybody know too, we have an outstanding preservation lab, and this is a before and after. We had a huge flood in the 1860s, and this is what we call original law, and this is before surface cleaning and after surface cleaning. So this will just tell you kind of you know what the flood did to it before, and kind of how it was what the condition of it was afterwards. So we do a lot of preservation work at the state archives, creating new phase boxes, doing repairs of tears, doing framing, custom framing for exhibits, creating new binding for bound volumes. I'm really not doing preservation workshops. I'm really not doing it justice in this amount of time. But this is just sort of kind of just an example of some of our preservation work as well. So, okay.
That was wonderful, Chris. Let me just start my video here again.
Okay.
Okay, now we do have some questions in the chat room. I'm going to let the class go ahead and put your questions into the chat box now if you haven't already. And while I'm waiting for them to do that, I do have a couple of comments and questions myself.
Okay, sure.
It's interesting. I have never, I've been doing genealogy for several decades now. And I can tell you, I've never once thought about professional licensure records. I mean, that is like a fascinating topic. I mean, so if you see that your ancestor on the either in the directory, list his occupation, or in the census list his occupation, I never thought to go look for a licensure record. So, you educated me today on something that I wasn't aware of.
And I have to say, before I started the state archives, I'll have to say I've learned so much working at the state archives that I did not know about California history, and that is one of them. Yeah, it's a substantial amount that I have learned, and yeah, I had no idea that we had professional wrestler files, vocational records, veterinary records. Yeah, it's something that you don't think about really, that the state archives would have those records. But and what kind of a genealogical source that would be. So yeah, and I learned something new every day. And I have to say, after our conversation with the Zoom test, I was looking for more information, and that's where I found the individual city censuses. So that's something I can thank you about. That just to sort of maybe broaden a little bit more about more records that I could bring to the presentation. So the one thing I know about working here is that you just learn, you learn something new every day. And so having those, the individual city censuses too, was interesting to me.
Well, actually, that was one of my next questions. Can you tell us a little bit more about the city census? What years did they cover? What cities?
They cover, I was prepping that. So they cover like, and I can maybe get back to you on this. They cover like, there were cities like Long Beach, Los Angeles, Compton, Chico, San Diego. So it's a whole range of like cities up and down California from 1897 to 1938, and a substantial amount of good demographic information. But I have to say, I have not looked at it before. So I will actually have to look at this material before, and in my 14 years, I've never pulled it. So I'll actually have to like go and take a look, and it might be something that we put on our list to digitize, because I think it's one of those, when you're researching census material, it's such a great gap filler, because if you're looking for somebody between 1910 and 1920, and here you have individual city censuses, that's a great gap filler. And I just don't think it's anything that's really been on our radar. But I can, after maybe after our talk, I can send you the catalog record, and that will give much more detail than because I'm thinking off the top of my head here. But I can give you the detail of it. But it's a substantial amount of cities, and a substantial time period, like 40 years.
Wow. I
Yeah.
have never once in all my years of research found a city census. That is fabulous. I definitely will plan on following up on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then a couple other questions I have before we go on to the student ones.
Sure.
You mentioned name changes. How far back do the records of your name changes go?
Name changes. I might have to go back. I might have to get back to you on that there, because the name changes. I might have, because they changed. It differed from. They're not. They were at the courts at one period of time, and then they came to the Secretary of State's office for us, and now they're over. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't, because we have them for a certain time period, but they were at the courts for a one period of time. But I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Now you mentioned.
I have to say, I don't know exactly what the time period is. That'd be a question I could just look up in the binder really quick and tell you, but I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, let me go on to another question. You mentioned appellate court records. So if you're doing local county work down at your county courthouse and you find a court case, the court case that's local there in the county will not necessarily tell you that it went up to the appellate court, correct? So you kind of have to research it from both directions, from the top going down and from the down going up.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people on the reference desk is that I don't know what it is about. I don't know in Nevada, but I think I'll probably misspeak here, but I think it's like every county in California should have at least one law library. So law librarians are fantastic. And so if you actually have some information about a court case, they should be able to navigate that for you, because they're going to have all the databases. They're going to have Lexis, they're going to have Westlaw. They'll be able to sort of tell you, yeah, did this make it up the chain to the appellate or the Supreme Court? So if there's anybody who, they have access to a law library, that's a really great resource. If not, then I think any library should be able to really at least assist you in, going that next step in figuring that out, because you really need to get those legal resources to figure out like what's the reporter citation, to figure out if that case has made it up the way to the appellate court. And sometimes it's very difficult, because we've had it both ways. We've had people looking for that lower court case, and then people with the lower court case are wondering, is there anything else? And so, but for us, we need a case number. And so if we don't have that case number, and a lot of times too, we'll just have the reporter citation, which we need more than the reporter citation. We actually need the case number. So that's something just to be aware of.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going through the chat box right now. Let's see here. We do have several questions. Let's see
Okay.
here. Let's see here. Just taking a minute to scroll through these. Kathy, would you like to undo your microphone and ask your question directly, or would you prefer that I ask it for you regarding the blanks?
Am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
Hi. Chris, I just was looking at Alameda County.
Okay.
And the county that I definitely would be the most interested in. And I see just an entire blank except for marriages. And I'm just wondering why.
It means that we don't have if you don't see anything there, that means we don't have it. And so what they did is that all of those series are everything that was possibly filmed. And so basically some counties, they filmed a lot of things. Some other counties, they only filmed a couple other series. So San Francisco, I don't think we have anything. So there's only like 28 counties that they did. And so some series they were filmed, and other series they weren't. Now, why they didn't film certain series, I can't speak to. Now for Alameda though, I think we have a lot of those original records in the office. So we actually have the bound volumes from Alameda. And those are actually on film. Those are just not the GSU stuff.
Okay, so in person, I could access those.
Yes, you could, or you could just send in a request and we would like print out the film for you.
Okay, is there a fee for doing that?
Yes, so there's we charge 25 cents a page for either text or microphone. And the scanning of, depending on, like if you want the whole microfilm roll scan, that's $10 right now. If you want if you're interested in the entire reel of microphone.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Kathy, did you have another question as well?
Further down, that was the records, the professional records, or I'm sorry, prison records.
Yes.
And my dad happened to be a prison guard at San Quentin after World War II.
Okay.
Would there be staff information for the prison like San Quentin?
There is a staff, there's a guard mug book. There's a guard volume. So that's been digitized on Ancestry. So if you have Ancestry, you can search it, or if you just want to put in a request through the archives web, you can just put in a request and we can look for it and see if their name comes up. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the time frame of that album is. So I don't know if that, but the 40s probably to me is a little late for the albums. But then again, that's sort of a special album. So I don't know if that kind of goes by our time frame.
Okay, so I should check on Ancestry then.
I check Ancestry. Yeah, I check Ancestry because all of our mug books have been scanned.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And then Jonathan, are you still logged in? Would you like to ask your question?
I'm still here, Suzanne. Yeah, Chris, so follow up to Kathleen's question about the chart. I did notice that there's also some missing counties. So for example, one county I'm interested in is San Mateo. Is your answer the same, which is you might have the physical records, they're just not available online?
I don't think we have anything from San Mateo. Yeah, I think I just know that we had the Alameda material, but the San Mateo, we just off the top of my head, I just don't think we have anything from San Mateo.
Okay, same
And I don't-
question for San Francisco, because there's a lot
Yeah.
of blanks with San Francisco too, where a lot of my ancestors lived. Do you have physical records, just not available online?
Yeah, same thing with San Francisco. We just don't have anything from San Francisco, and I don't. This GSU project, we have not a lot of documentation on it, so I'm not sure why they went to the 28 counties they went to. So they went to 28 counties, but they didn't go to all 58.
Hmm.
And so why they went to the counties they went to and why they didn't go to 58, did they not have, they only had a limited amount of resources, and so they only went to, these specific counties, they ran out of time. I'm not sure. Yeah, and we will take county records, if the county, reaches out and says, hey, look, we don't have the space for this, or we think this is the more appropriate repository. So we will take in some county records, and we do. But as a rule, the counties, will have their own local repositories to take their records. So we do have some county records, but more than likely the records will be at the county level. But we get a lot of requests for San Francisco. San Francisco has a great city archive. So they have a substantial amount of records at the city archive. If you're interested, if you're looking for specific records, we refer patrons to the city archive a lot.
And what about Cal State Library?
The library, as a rule, the state archives would be the repository of, government records and county records, but I can't say that the California State Library wouldn't have county records. So you could contact the state library. I don't know that they would have any, because but yeah, it'd be worth asking.
Just trying to avoid driving from Reno to Sacramento to San Francisco to.
Yeah, what are you actually looking for? What specifically are you looking for?
Oh, I have some gaps in my particular genealogical searches for, land records at the county level in San Francisco and things of that sort. My great-grandfather was a lawyer, and so he had a lot of involvement. He was actually California Attorney General, so I'm looking for his records. Some of what you talked about is interesting to me on that front, but he also practiced law in San Francisco. So I just don't know what I'm going to find on your site.
Yeah. Well, if he was we'd be interested. If he was the California Attorney General, we would be interested in anything you would find. Yeah, because that would be very interesting. Yeah, if you're looking for land, have you reached out? Have you looked at the recorder's office at all in San Francisco?
No.
Yeah, you might look there. But yeah, San Francisco.
Some of this is going back to like 1850. I have some folks who arrived in 1850 and had businesses and so forth on the wharf, and I just don't.
Oh well, do you know what the businesses are?
One was an oyster house, one was a grain merchant, things like that.
Yeah, we have the articles of incorporation. So if they were ever incorporated, you could put in a request for us to look those up.
Going back to 1850?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Well, I'll send you an email.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, and then Jim, are you still logged in? Let's see if he's still there. Jim, are you still there? Okay, Jim's question was, Chris, are you familiar with the Delia Hammond Law Collection at UOP. She's my wife's great-great-grandmother.
I am not, but I know the the head of special collections at UOP. So, I mean, I can, help if I can help facilitate, getting in contact with the archivist there. I would be more than happy to do that. I am not familiar with that collection, but I know the head of special collections there. So if I can, help facilitate getting him in contact with him, I would be happy to do that.
Okay, great. And then Jean, are you still logged on? Would you like to ask your question directly to Chris? Jean would like you to go into a little bit more detail. She says, I'm a little confused. Are the records searchable by an individual, or must you write an email and ask for the records?
I guess, are we talking I mean, I guess I can rephrase if I understand if I understand the question correctly. The Genealogical Society of Utah collection, which is located in the handout that was presented in the worksheet.
Mm-hmm.
All of that material has been digitized by Ancestry. So if you happen to have a subscription to Ancestry, or you happen to have access to your local library that has access to Ancestry, all of that, and you have a name, all of that material from GSU is searchable through Ancestry. If you have a name, but if you don't have access to Ancestry, that's fine. If you want to send us a request and you have a name, we can search that for you and make it accessible. So I don't know if that clarifies it.
Kind of like if I'm interested in getting records from Laguna Honda Hospital in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. Well, we wouldn't, is that like a private hospital?
No, I think it's a public hospital.
Yeah. Well, the only hospitals we would have have been established by the state.
This might be a city.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would probably contact the hospital itself.
Okay.
Yeah, I would contact the hospital itself. So sorry if you're seeing my team's messages here. But I would contact the hospital itself. And I think now probably most hospitals have is this like for a patient who may have been?
Yeah, great-grandfather was there?
Yeah, okay. So I think most patients probably have, or most hospitals have like a concierge, or something where they'll, beyond just their records requests, but they'll probably have something where they'll be able to help you request some of those records. How long has the hospital been in existence?
It says the early 1900s and is still in existence today.
Yeah, so I bet you they've handled those requests before. So, and it's probably there's probably a department that either handles those requests, or they have like a patient concierge, or somebody who will be able to assist you, whether
Okay.
it's not necessarily the active patients, but there's probably somebody, especially a hospital that old, there's probably somebody who has been assigned to take care of those records.
Okie dokie.
Yeah.
So but going back to kind of just a different angle, basically the records that you really have that are searchable are available on Ancestry. Otherwise, you have to go into archival documents individually. They're not searchable. Did I get that right?
Well, we don't have a lot of material that has basically been like digitized. That's like on Minerva, for example, that is like
Okay.
searchable. Like So basically what is searchable is basically has been digitized by Ancestry and is sort of provided by them as kind of a, you know, the third party source. And so you can, you know, basically do keyword searches. The other, or not keyword searches, but like name searches. The other resources available, and I'm kind of talking like genealogical resources that's sort of available, is the like the Expedientes and Diseños that I had mentioned. That's on the online, not online archive, but the Internet Archive. So if you search for those are available on the Internet Archive. So, but those are, and to an extent, you know, if you know exactly who the grantee and the grantor are, you can be able to find those online as well. We also have other items that are online, but it's not really genealogically related. Like we have some audiovisual materials. We also have some oral histories. All our oral histories are online from our oral history program. So, which could be genealogically related if those are individuals who happen to have done oral history. They tend to have been government officials. So if you happen to have a relative who was a government official, then we do have those oral histories online. The oral histories were mostly like who had served in government, who had been a legislator, or somebody who had been in government.
Okay, that kind of makes sense, because I went to your website where you were talking and I couldn't find a really good search function. So I said, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's like I kind of indicate, like it's a different type of website because we really organize things a little differently. And so, yeah.
Yeah, when you said that, that's why I went to your website. I said, I wonder what he means. So now I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, well, I'm waiting. I'll let the class know that, this will be your last chance to get your questions in. So either you can unmute your microphone and ask Chris directly, or you can put it in the chat box. And while I'm waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, I've got a few last ones. Are your collections listed in Archive Grid?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll ask our head of collections management if they are. I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question.
Okay, now I'm sure that when you're talking about the state hospital records, I'm sure that kind of perked up a lot of people's interest. Because as we all know, sometimes the explanation for a missing ancestor is that they went into such an institution,
Right.
and then sometimes we're never even heard from ever again. So my question is do you know offhand on the federal censuses, are the patients who are inpatients at the state hospitals in California, are they listed by name on the federal census?
I think I've seen, I can't be 100% sure, but I think there are, I've had enough interactions with patrons to know that I'm pretty sure they are, because I've heard, enough anecdotal evidence that, well, my relative was listed at Stockton State Hospital, or they were listed at Agnew State Hospital. So I think they are listed as by name and because you'll see, they'll say like, one of the state hospitals was Eldridge, or listed as Eldridge on the state census. So I'm pretty sure that they are listed as state hospitals.
So if you find your ancestor's name on a federal census, and at that state hospital, then there's probably a chance then that you would have further details on that particular patient.
Well, maybe. It depends if we have the records. So it depends on, like, for example, Stockton, most of our records from Stockton on patients in like really like around the 20s. So like, say you're in the 1940 census and you find, my relative is in Stockton State Hospital, we're going to have almost nothing. So it really depends on the time period that you're looking for. Or even if you find, like, you know, when's the 1950 census coming out? In a couple of years, right? So you might find somebody in the 1950 census, and we might have something like from Agnews. I think we have a little bit more, but there might be a restriction on it. So that's where I would go. Like the first place I might go, like for our state hospital records, is to maybe even go to the Online Archive of California, look at the finding aid, and see kind of, that might even be better than going to our catalog, is to go to our finding aid on Online Archive of California, see what record series we have, and see what the years covered of what the record series we have. So like our abstracts of commitment only go to like 24, I think, for Stockton. So after that, we're not going to have much. So we may, the earlier probably stuff, the better, but it just depends on what records we have. Now there are materials from the state hospitals that we have that we don't, they're accessioned, which means that we brought them in, but we haven't described them, we haven't put out a finding aid. That's where you want to go to the catalog and put those materials in.
You don't
But
have to stay.
that would be like, you know, but you know, that would be also knowing that, yeah, I'm looking for like Agnew State Hospital, I'm looking for DeWitt, you know, I'm looking for these other state hospitals, that I'm looking for Napa State Hospital, even though we don't have records from Napa, you know, quite yet, but or not a lot, I don't think. But knowing those records from those specific state hospitals, and then you might get the catalog record for the accession that we brought in, because it maybe haven't been described. So if you're first using our catalog, maybe to go back to the previous question, the Online Archive of California might be a better first step, because then you at least see the finding aid and you see like what's been described and what the records creators are. And then if you look at the records creators, you can put those records creators into our catalog. And then that might give you more, you know, more insight, or more, well, not insight, but more, you know, relevant searches, I guess, search results.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So Chris, I'm going to say.
I've got a question if I can.
Go ahead, Jim.
This is Jim. And Chris, yeah, if you could help me with a contact at UOP, that would be great.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Do you have mining claims?
Oh, pardon me?
Do you have mining claims?
Mining claims. See, I'm thinking about another presentation I was looking at the other day. I don't believe we do, but if I can get your contact information, I will follow up with you.
Okay.
I don't believe we do.
Okay.
I believe they're at the county level, but I'll have to get back to you. I was just looking over some material for this presentation, and I'm almost positive they're at the county level, but if I can get your contact information, I'll follow up with you.
Okay. Oh, and Kathy, my grandfather was also at San Quentin, but he was on the other side of the bars.
Okay.
It's a small world.
Yeah, but he was there a little earlier. It was the 30s. I think he was there bootlegging, but I'm not sure.
Oh, I've got some of those relatives. Chris, your email, I'm not seeing it on the handout. Are you going to put it up on a screen, or?
Can I just give it? Can I just say it and then you can?
Sure.
I apologize for all these messages here. It's it's chris.garmire@sos.ca.gov.
Would you like to put it into the chat box, Chris? That way everyone
Oh
can-
yeah, let me get to the, how do I get to the
Oh,
chat?
stop sharing. And that'll bring the chat box up for you.
Oh, there we go. Oh. So sure. Okay. There we go. Chat box. I apologize for, here we go. Okay.
And while he's doing that, I just want to remind the class, if you want to download the entire chat box for all the links and email addresses and everything else that was in the chat box today, just click on those three little buttons, those three little dots in the lower right-hand side of the chat box, and that'll download the whole box. That way you didn't miss anything. Okay, so any last questions from the class to Chris? Okay, well, Chris, I'll say thank you very much. And we really enjoyed it and learned a lot from you today. And I will let you know, I'll be in touch with you soon.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody.